Hi, this is Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of RegAlytics, with your update on this week's 34,422 regulatory alerts. I'm going to try something new this week, a teaser. I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm not going to give you the answer until next week. And if you have a question about regulation that you want answered, put it in the comments. I'm also trying something else. If you would like to sponsor an episode of RegAlytics, mail me swag from your company. I will wear the swag, and I will talk about whatever regulatory area you would like me to talk about. So the question of this week is this: which company got the biggest fine in 2025? Which company got the biggest fine in 2025? You can guess in the comments, but I'm not going to reveal the answer until next week's show. And again, if you want to sponsor an episode, mail me swag and request a topic. Moving on. So, the regulator of the week is the White House, and the topic of the week is change. As many of you know, I avoid getting into politics, and today is no exception. But I do want to point out a few sleeper hits in the White House arsenal that I don't think mainstream media is focused on, mostly because there's just so much going on. So, welcome to the boring part of the White House. First, President Trump has issued 230 executive orders. Is that the most in history? No, it is not. The most was Franklin D. Roosevelt with 3,726 executive orders, followed by Woodrow Wilson with 1,803 and Herbert Hoover with 1,003. One executive order this week that really stood out to me is Executive Order 14376, which bans institutional investors from buying single-family homes. Agencies that have any influence over home buying have been ordered to review their rules and align them with this new policy direction. What else did the White House do? On the 13th, President Trump officially designated the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally of the United States. On the 20th, he extended a pre-existing executive order that really caught my attention, partly because I happened to watch the movie Nuremberg last weekend. That movie with Russell Crowe talks about how after Adolf Hitler committed suicide, world powers chose not to execute captured Nazi leaders, but instead created a public international tribunal. That process eventually led to the creation of the International Criminal Court, or ICC. The idea behind the ICC was simple. If crimes against humanity ever happened again at that scale, the world would have a mechanism to respond. So it struck me that this executive order is actually a declaration of a national emergency related to the ICC. When I dug into the history, I realized this goes way back. So President Clinton signed the Rome Statute in 2000, signaling U.S. support for the ICC, but it was never ratified. And the Bush administration later announced that the U.S. would not join at all. Our data goes back to 2020, and in June of 2020, President Trump imposed economic sanctions and visa restrictions on individuals associated with the ICC. It used to be my dream job to work there, which I didn't even know any of this was going on at the time. But anyway, those sanctions were ultimately lifted by President Biden in 2021. But then, in May of 2024, President Biden publicly criticized the ICC over attempts to arrest Israeli leaders. President Trump returned to office and on February 6th reimposed the sanctions, calling the ICC illegitimate and stating that neither the U.S. nor Israel are parties to the court. It's the classic conundrum of international law. Countries like the idea of rules applying to other countries, just not themselves. This week, the White House also signed 4 bills into law, including a Trafficking Survivors Relief Act, which essentially says that if you committed a crime because you were being trafficked against your will, you may have a legal defense. And finally, the White House, through the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ, issued new emergency guidance under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. Really quick history lesson. The CEQ was created in 1970 by the same law that created NEPA. NEPA says the federal government has to consider environmental impacts before acting. CEQ is the White House office that helps make sure the agencies do that. And over time, agencies became so afraid of violating NEPA that they started slowing down emergency responses to do environmental paperwork. This new guidance tells agencies that in real emergencies, they should act first to address immediate threats, think about environment impacts where practical, and do not let paperwork slow down life-saving decisions. And that's it this week for RegAlytics. We have the global supply chain of the world's regulatory alerts in one very easy to use place. If you need a solution for anything related to regulation, give us a call.